The sky burned orange as the first ships came through the clouds. High Luminary Solveth stood at the great window of the council chamber, his bioluminescent skin flickering with colors of fear and confusion. In his 400 years of life, he had never seen anything like this. The Valanshi people had lived in peace for generations. They had no enemies. They had no wars. They had forgotten what war even looked like. Now they were learning. The ships were massive and ugly, covered in dark armor that seemed to eat the light. They descended like a swarm of insects, blocking out the twin suns that had warmed Valanth Prime for billions of years. Solveth counted them as they came. 10, 20, 40. More kept appearing. "What are they?" whispered Elder Myrith beside him. Her glow had turned pale white, the color of terror. Solveth did not answer. He did not know. The answer came moments later, when the first transmission broke through every communication device on the planet. The voice was harsh and clicking, like stones grinding together. "People of Valanth Prime, this is Commander Thrixol of the Kethrak Dominion. Your world now belongs to us. Do not resist. Resistance will only increase your suffering." Solveth watched as smaller craft began dropping from the larger ships. Landing pods, thousands of them falling toward the cities like black rain. The Valanshi had defensive shields, but they were old. They had been built to stop meteors and space debris, not weapons of war. When the Kethrak fired their first volley, the shields flickered and died within minutes. Then the slaughter began. Solveth would never forget the sounds, the screaming, the breaking of crystal structures that had stood for centuries. The terrible clicking laughter of the invaders. The Kethrak were nightmares made real. They stood 8 feet tall on 6 legs, their bodies covered in black armor that was not armor at all, but their own hardened skin. Their arms ended in curved blades that could cut through stone. Their heads were masses of compound eyes and snapping mandibles. They moved fast, faster than anything that size should move. And they were not here to conquer. They were here to harvest. Solveth watched on the emergency screens as his people were dragged from their homes. The Kethrak did not kill everyone. That would have been mercy. Instead, they selected. The strong ones, the healthy ones, were forced into organic pods that pulsed with sickly light. The old, the sick, the very young, they simply trampled underfoot. "The breeding pits," Elder Myrith said, her voice hollow. "The Kethrak use other species to feed their young." Solveth felt something he had never felt before. It was cold and heavy in his chest. It was despair. "We must do something," he said. "What can we do? We have no weapons. We have no soldiers. We have nothing." She was right. The Valanshi had evolved beyond violence. They had devoted their civilization to art, to music, to the understanding of the universe. They had believed that all intelligent species would eventually reach the same peaceful state. They had been fools. Commander Thrixol's face appeared on every screen in the city. His mandibles clicked with amusement as he spoke. "No species in 3 star clusters has ever repelled a Dominion harvest. Your neighbors tried. The Glorvani tried. The Mindari tried. They all fell. You will fall too." His compound eyes seemed to look directly at Solveth. "Accept your fate, little glowing ones. You are livestock now. Nothing more." The transmission ended. Solveth stood in silence for a long moment. Around him, the other elders wept, or prayed, or simply stared at nothing. Outside, the screaming continued. Then he remembered something. It was a small memory, from centuries ago, when he was young. A group of strange visitors had come to Valanth Prime. They were not like any species Solveth had seen before or since. They called themselves representatives of something called the Galactic Concord, a union of species dedicated to mutual protection. The Valanshi had signed their treaty out of politeness. They had accepted a small device, a beacon, and placed it in the council chamber's emergency vault. Then they had forgotten about it entirely, until now. Solveth moved through the chaos of the chamber. Falling debris had cracked the floor. Fires burned in the distance, but the vault was still intact. He pressed his hand to the ancient lock. It recognized him and opened with a soft hiss. Inside sat a simple metal box covered in dust. Solveth lifted it carefully and opened the lid. The beacon inside was small, no larger than his palm. It had a single button and a small screen with words in a language he could not read. But he remembered what the visitors had told him. If you are ever in danger, they had said, press this button. Help will come. Solveth hesitated. That had been 300 years ago. The Concord might not even exist anymore. The beacon might not work. And even if it did, what could anyone do against the Kethrak? They had conquered dozens of worlds. They had never been stopped. Another explosion shook the building. Solveth heard the clicking of Kethrak soldiers in the corridors below. They were coming. He pressed the button. The beacon hummed. The screen lit up with symbols he did not understand. Then, a single line of text appeared, translated into his language. Article 7 invoked. Distress signal transmitted. Destination, Terran Defense Command. Solveth stared at the words. Terran. He did not know what that meant. He could not remember if the Concord representatives had ever mentioned that name. Elder Mireth appeared at his side. What did you do? I called for help, Solveth said quietly. I do not know if anyone will answer. The door below them burst open. Kethrak soldiers poured into the building, their bladed arms slashing at anything that moved. Solveth and the surviving elders fled into the hidden tunnels beneath the chamber. They ran through darkness as their world burned above them. Behind them, the beacon continued to pulse, sending its signal out into the cold void of space. It traveled faster than light, bouncing through relay stations that had been placed centuries ago, crossing distances that would take normal ships years to travel. The signal reached its destination in 3 hours. Somewhere, in a part of the galaxy that the Kethrak had never visited, that signal was received. Alarms sounded. Officers looked at screens, and then at each other. Article 7, someone said. That is a full protection request. Who sent it? A species called the Valanchi, Valanth Prime. They are under attack by the Kethrak Dominion. There was silence in the command center. Then a single order was given. Wake up the Perseverance. Tell Captain Vasquez she has a job. Far away, on Valanth Prime, Solveth huddled in the darkness with the survivors of his people. He did not know if his call had been heard. He did not know if help would come. He could only hope. And somewhere in the stars, something was already moving toward them. Something the Kethrak had never faced. Something that would teach them the true meaning of fear. Commander Thrixol stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devourer of Worlds, and watched the harvest continue below. Everything was going according to plan. The Valanchi were weak, just as his scouts had promised. They had no weapons, no warriors, no will to fight. By the end of the week, his ships would be full of fresh specimens for the breeding pits. His young would feast well this season. Commander, his communications officer called out. We have intercepted and decoded a transmission from the planet's surface. Show me. The message appeared on the main screen. Thrixol read it with his many eyes, his mandibles clicking slowly as he processed the words. Article 7 invoked. Distress signal transmitted. Destination, Terran Defense Command. What is this? He demanded. What is Article 7? What is Terran? None of them spoke. Someone answer me. Finally, his eldest advisor, a scarred veteran named Vrextau, stepped forward. His voice was quieter than usual. Commander, Article 7 is part of an old treaty, the Galactic Concord. It is a mutual defense agreement between certain species. I know what the Concord is, Thrixol snapped. We have crushed Concord members before. The Glorvani were Concord. The Mindari were Concord. They all fell. Yes, Commander, but they did not invoke Article 7. What is special about Article 7? Vrextal hesitated. Article 7 is a specific request for Terran intervention. The word hung in the air. Thrixol noticed that several of his officers had gone very still. Their compound eyes were fixed on him, waiting. Terran, Thrixol repeated. You mean humans? Yes, Commander. Thrixol made a sound of contempt. Humans, I have heard of them. Small creatures, soft skin. No claws, no armor, no venom. They are prey animals. Why should I fear prey? With respect, Commander, the humans are not what they appear to be. Explain. Vrextal gestured to the intelligence officer, who began pulling up files on the main screen. What followed made Thrixol's confidence slowly drain away. The first file was from the Glorvani, the great water giants who had ruled an empire of ocean worlds. Their ambassador's final message before his planet fell to the Dominion played on the screen. We thought we understood predators, the Glorvani said, his massive form filling the image. We were wrong. The humans are something else. On their homeworld, they evolved as persistence predators. Do you know what that means? They do not chase prey with speed or strength. They simply follow. They walk after their prey for hours, days, weeks. They do not stop. They do not tire. They just keep coming, keep following, until the prey collapses from exhaustion. Then, they move in for the kill. The Glorvani's eyes were wide with something like religious terror. They are the monsters that never stop. Never. The second file was from the Silithine, masters of chemical warfare. Their species had developed the most deadly poisons in the known galaxy. We tried to assassinate their leaders, the Silithine report stated. We used our finest toxins. Do you know what happened? They survived. Not because they had antidotes. Because their bodies had already adapted to similar chemicals. They consume neurotoxins for pleasure. They drink ethanol, which destroys cells on contact. They eat capsaicin, which causes burning pain in every species we have tested. They add it to their food because they enjoy the sensation. These are not normal beings. They have turned self-destruction into recreation. The third file was from the Mindari, a species of telepaths who could read and control the thoughts of other beings. They had been one of the most feared species in their region of space. We made contact with a human mind once, the Mindari Collective reported. Only once. We will never do so again. Their thoughts are chaos. Contradictions layered on contradictions. They can love and hate the same thing in the same moment. They hold beliefs they know are false. They make decisions based on emotions they cannot name. And beneath it all, there is something else. Something cold and patient. They call it spite. It is the willingness to harm themselves if it means harming their enemy more. We do not understand it. We do not want to understand it. The fourth file was the oldest, from the Kethrak's own archives. Thrixol had never seen it before. It showed a battle from nearly a century ago, when a Kethrak raiding party had encountered a human colony ship. The ship had been damaged and alone. The humans had been outnumbered 50-1. The video showed Kethrak warriors breaching the human ship, expecting easy prey. What they found was different. The humans fought with everything. They used weapons when they had them. When the weapons were gone, they used tools. When the tools broke, they used their bare hands. They bit, they scratched, they threw themselves at enemies twice their size, with no thought of survival. One human soldier, a female, had been surrounded by 6 Kethrak warriors. She was bleeding from a dozen wounds. She should have surrendered. Instead, she smiled. Then she detonated the explosive charge strapped to her chest. The video ended. They destroyed themselves, Thrixol said, slowly. Just to kill 6 of our warriors. Yes, Commander. The humans have a concept that does not translate well into our language. The closest meaning is this: they would rather die causing harm to their enemy than live having lost. Thrixol was silent for a long moment. These are just stories, he finally said. Propaganda, exaggeration. Humans are small and weak. One ship against our fleet means nothing. You think they will send only one ship? It does not matter how many they send. We are the Kethrak Dominion. We have never been defeated. But even as he spoke, Thrixol felt something unfamiliar crawling through his mind. It was cold and sharp, like a blade pressed against his thoughts. It was doubt. He pushed it away and turned back to the window. Below, the harvest continued. His soldiers dragged screaming Valanchi into transport pods. Everything was proceeding as planned. Continue the operation. Double the pace. I want this planet stripped within 3 days. And if the humans come? Thrixol clicked his mandibles in what passed for a smile among his species. Then we will add them to the harvest. Human specimens might make interesting food for our young. His officers nodded and returned to their work. But Thrixol remained, watching his commander with ancient, knowing eyes. He had seen many commanders in his long life. He had watched them lead the Dominion to victory after victory. He had also watched them die, consumed by overconfidence, destroyed by enemies they had underestimated. He wondered which fate awaited Thrixol. The old advisor said nothing more. He simply returned to his station and began reviewing the intelligence files again, searching for any information that might help them survive what was coming. Because deep in his gut, in a place where logic and reason could not reach, Thrixol knew the truth. The humans were coming, and when they arrived, everything would change. 3 days. That was how long they had. 3 days until the Kethrak Dominion learned whether the stories were true. 3 days until they discovered if humans were really the monsters the galaxy whispered about. 3 days until the predators became the prey. 3 days passed like 3 centuries for the survivors of Valanth Prime. High Luminary Solveth had led what remained of his people into the deep tunnels beneath the ancient cities. These passages had been built long ago, in an age when the Valanchi still remembered fear. Now they served their original purpose once again. Thousands huddled in the darkness. They had little food, little water, and no hope. Above them, they could hear the Kethrak moving through the ruins, searching for survivors. Every few hours, the screaming would start again, as another group was found and dragged away. Solveth had stopped counting the dead. The beacon, Elder Myrith whispered to him in the darkness. Did it truly work? Is anyone coming? Solveth could not answer. He had pressed the button. He had seen the confirmation message. But 3 days had passed, and nothing had changed. Perhaps the Galactic Concord no longer existed. Perhaps the Terrans, whoever they were, had decided the Valanchi were not worth saving. Perhaps they were truly alone. Above them, in orbit, Commander Thrixol grew more confident with each passing hour. His ships had harvested over 2 million Valanchi. The breeding pits would be full for generations, and no rescue had come. You see, he told his officers, the humans are cowards. They send no help to their allies. The stories were just that, stories. His officers agreed, though some of them still watched the sensors with nervous eyes. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. It started as a small reading on the edge of the system, a hyperspace distortion, the kind that indicated an approaching ship. Thrixol's sensor officer reported it immediately. "One contact, Commander, entering the system at high velocity." "One ship?" Thrixol laughed. "Show me." The main screen flickered and displayed the approaching vessel. Thrixol's laughter died in his throat. The ship was not beautiful. It was not elegant or graceful or impressive in any way that the Kethrak understood. It was angular and harsh, painted in dark colors that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its hull was covered in scorch marks and dents and patches of metal that had clearly been welded on after battle damage. It looked like it had been through 100 wars and refused to die. It looked angry. "What is that thing?" one of his officers whispered. The ship's identification beacon activated, broadcasting its name to anyone who could receive it. UNSC Perseverance. "That is a human warship," Thrixol said quietly. "One of their heavy cruisers, if our intelligence is correct." "One cruiser against 47 of our ships? They are insane." The human ship slowed as it approached the planet. It did not attempt to hide or maneuver. It simply flew straight toward the Kethrak fleet, as if the 47 warships in its path were nothing more than empty space. Then a transmission came through on all frequencies. The screen showed a human female sitting in a command chair. She was small, smaller than Thrixol had expected. Her skin was brown, her hair was black and cut short, and her eyes were dark and calm. She wore a uniform marked with symbols Thrixol did not recognize. She did not look afraid. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Nations Space Command vessel Perseverance," she said. Her voice was steady and clear. "We have received your Article 7 distress beacon. Under Galactic Concord Treaty obligations, we are responding to your request for aid." She paused, and her eyes seemed to look directly at Thrixol through the screen. "To the Kethrak Dominion vessels currently in orbit. You have 15 minutes to release all captives and withdraw from this system. This is your only warning." The transmission ended. Silence filled the bridge of the Devourer of Worlds. Then Thrixol began to laugh. 15 minutes? One ship gives us 15 minutes? He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel. Let me speak to this human captain." The channel opened. Captain Vasquez appeared on screen again, waiting. "Little Terran," Thrixol said, still laughing, "you are outnumbered 47-1. You are outgunned beyond measure. Your single ship cannot possibly stand against the might of the Kethrak Dominion." He leaned forward, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "Withdraw now, and we may let you leave with your limbs attached. Stay, and we will add you to our harvest. Human meat might be a delicacy for our young." Captain Vasquez listened to his words without expression. When he finished, she simply nodded. "Acknowledged," she said. 15 minutes. The channel closed. Thrixol stared at the blank screen. "That is it? That is her response?" "It would appear so, Commander." "She is bluffing. She must be. No one is that foolish." But as the minutes ticked by, the human ship did not move. It did not retreat. It did not call for reinforcements. It simply held position, waiting. Thrixol ordered his fleet into battle formation. 47 ships arranged themselves around the Devourer of Worlds, their weapons charging, their crews ready. Against them stood one ship, one small, battered, ugly ship. "This is embarrassing," Thrixol muttered. "All batteries, fire." "Commander, the 15 minutes have not yet passed. I do not care about their deadline. Fire." His weapons officer hesitated for just a moment. Then he reached for the firing controls. He never touched them. The sensor officer screamed, "Commander, new contacts, multiple hyperspace distortions." Thrixol spun toward the screen. "What? More human ships?" "No, Commander, not ships. Missiles." The space around the Perseverance seemed to tear open as objects emerged from hyperspace. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They had been launched before the ship even arrived, traveling through hyperspace on preset courses, timed to arrive at exactly this moment. The human ship had not come alone. It had brought death with it. The missiles struck the outer ring of Kethrak ships before anyone could react. Explosions bloomed in the darkness of space. 3 ships vanished in the first volley. Then, 10. and through the chaos, the Perseverance began to move. On the surface of Velant Prime, in the dark tunnels where the survivors hid, Solveth felt the ground shake. He looked up, not understanding. "What is happening?" Elder Myrith asked. Solveth crawled to a crack in the tunnel ceiling, a place where he could see a sliver of the sky above. What he saw made his bioluminescent skin flare with colors he could not control. The sky was full of fire. Ships were burning in orbit. Kethrak ships, the same vessels that had seemed so invincible just days ago, were now exploding one after another. And cutting through them, moving with terrible purpose, was a single dark shape. The humans had come. Solveth began to weep, not from sadness, not from fear, from hope. Above him, the battle was just beginning. And the Kethrak were about to learn why the galaxy whispered about humans in the dark. They were about to meet the true monsters. The Battle of Velant Prime would be remembered for 1,000 years. It would be studied in military academies across the galaxy. It would be whispered about in dark corners where frightened beings gathered. It would become a legend, a warning, a promise. It would teach the universe what humans truly were. Commander Thrixol watched in disbelief as his fleet burned. The missiles had torn through his outer formation like claws through soft flesh. 12 ships were gone in the first 30 seconds. The Kethrak had never lost 12 ships in an entire war. "Return fire," he screamed. "Destroy that human vessel." His remaining ships obeyed. Plasma bolts and energy beams lanced out toward the Perseverance, enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Several shots hit their target. The human ship shuddered. Atmosphere vented from a dozen breaches. But it kept coming. Inside the Perseverance, alarms screamed and emergency lights flashed red. Captain Vasquez gripped her command chair as the ship rocked from another impact. "Hull breach on Deck 7, someone shouted. "Damage to forward weapons array. Engine 2 is offline." Vasquez nodded calmly. "Damage control teams, seal those breaches. Engineering, get me Engine 2 back online. Helm, bring us in closer." Her first officer stared at her. "Closer? Captain, they are tearing us apart." "Exactly. They think they are winning." Vasquez smiled, and there was something cold in that smile. "Get me closer. I want boarding range." The Perseverance dove into the Kethrak formation, like a wolf among sheep. It was smaller than the alien warships, more agile, and crewed by beings who did not know how to surrender. Below deck, the damage control teams worked in conditions that would have killed most species. Fire burned in the corridors. The air was thin and filled with smoke. Metal groaned and twisted as the hull took hit after hit. Chief Engineer Rodriguez welded a patch onto a hole the size of a door while plasma fire streaked past the breach. His hands were burned. His lungs ached. He was laughing. "Is that all you got?" he shouted at the void beyond the hull. "My grandmother hits harder than that." Beside him, 2 other engineers worked without pause. One had a piece of metal embedded in her shoulder. She had refused medical treatment until the breach was sealed. The other was singing, actually singing, a song from old Earth about a ship that would not sink. This was what the Kethrak did not understand. They fought because of it. They took their terror and their pain, and they transformed it into something else. Something that could not be measured or predicted. Something called Defiance. On the bridge of the Devourer of Worlds, Thrixol was beginning to feel something he had never felt before. The human ship should have been dead by now. His fleet had hit it hundreds of times. Pieces of it were floating in space, but it kept fighting, kept moving, kept killing his ships one by one with precise shots that found weak points he did not know existed. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. "They are one ship." "Commander," Vrextall said quietly, "they are preparing boarding craft." "What? The humans are launching boarding pods. They are coming for us. Thrixol made a sound of disbelief. Boarding? They want to board our ships? With what? Their soft little bodies against our warriors? It would appear so, Commander. Let them come. My soldiers will tear them apart. The first boarding pod hit the Devourer of Worlds with a crash that shook the entire vessel. Kethrak warriors gathered at the breach point, their blade arms raised, their mandibles clicking with anticipation. They had fought dozens of species. They had never lost a boarding action. The airlock blasted open. Smoke poured through the breach. For a moment, nothing moved. Then figures emerged from the smoke, walking slowly, deliberately. They were small compared to the Kethrak. They wore armor that covered their soft bodies, painted with symbols and scratched with marks from previous battles. Their faces were hidden behind helmets with glowing eyes. There were 12 of them, 12 humans against 50 Kethrak warriors. The lead human, a large male with sergeant markings, looked at the assembled aliens. Then he cracked his neck and rolled his shoulders. Finally, Sergeant Torres said, I was getting bored. The Kethrak attacked. What happened next was not a fight. It was a demonstration. The humans moved with terrifying coordination. They did not stand and trade blows like honorable warriors. They cheated. They used explosives that targeted the Kethrak's compound eyes. They fired at leg joints, not center mass. They worked in pairs, one distracting while the other flanked. And when their weapons failed, they did not stop. One Marine, a woman named Kowalski, had her rifle destroyed by a Kethrak blade. She responded by drawing a knife and jamming it into the soft tissue beneath the alien's mandibles. When the knife broke off, she used the broken handle to gouge at its eyes. Private Chen was thrown against a wall, hard enough to crack his armor. He got back up, spat blood, and charged his attacker with nothing but a piece of broken pipe. Sergeant Torres took a blade through the shoulder. The Kethrak warrior who struck him clicked with satisfaction, already turning to find another victim. Torres grabbed the blade with his free hand, holding it in place. Blood poured down his arm. He looked directly into the alien's compound eyes. That, Torres said calmly, was a mistake. Then he headbutted the Kethrak so hard that 3 of its mandibles shattered. As it reeled backward, Torres drew his sidearm and shot it 6 times in the face. Room clear, someone shouted. 50 Kethrak warriors lay dead or dying on the floor. 12 humans stood among them, bleeding and broken, but alive. Torres looked down at the blade still stuck in his shoulder, and sighed. Medic's going to yell at me again. Similar scenes played out across the Kethrak fleet. Boarding teams tore through ship after ship, fighting with a ferocity that defied logic. They took wounds that should have killed them and kept fighting. They used tactics that no species had ever tried, because no species had ever been crazy enough to think they might work. On the bridge of the Devourer of Worlds, Commander Thrixol finally understood. The stories were true. All of them. Commander, his tactical officer reported, we have lost 31 ships. The humans have captured 6 more. Our fleet is in full retreat. Then we retreat as well. Set course for... Commander, we cannot. The human vessel has disabled our engines. We are dead in space. Thrixol stared at the screen. The Perseverance, battered and burning but still alive, was positioning itself alongside his flagship. Another boarding pod launched. This one carried only 1 person. Captain Vasquez walked through the corridors of the Devourer of Worlds alone. She passed the bodies of Kethrak warriors who had tried to stop her. None of them had succeeded. She did not carry a weapon. The bridge doors opened before her. Inside, Commander Thrixol waited with his remaining officers. They were armed. She was not. You could have left, Vasquez said quietly. We gave you 15 minutes. Thrixol made a sound that might have been a laugh. You are alone, human. You are unarmed. You cannot possibly... Vasquez moved. It was not fast, not by human standards, but to the Kethrak she seemed to blur. One moment she was standing by the door. The next she was next to Thrixol, her hands finding pressure points that should not have existed, targeting nerve clusters that Kethrak doctors had always believed were protected by their armor. Thrixol fell to his knees, his body betraying him. Vasquez looked down at him with those dark, calm eyes. Tell your Dominion what happened here. Tell them what waits for them if they ever target a Concord-protected world again. She turned and walked toward the door. Wait, Thrixol gasped. How? How did you defeat us? We are the Kethrak. We have conquered 100 worlds. We have never been stopped. Vasquez paused. When she spoke, her voice was soft. You made a mistake. You thought size and strength and numbers were all that mattered. You thought we were weak because we are small and soft. She looked back at him over her shoulder. But you forgot something important. What? Monsters do not need claws. They just need the will to keep going when everything says they should stop. She walked out. Behind her, Commander Thrixol lay on the floor of his own bridge, surrounded by his defeated officers, and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. He would spend the rest of his life trying to answer that question. The silence was the strangest part. For 4 days, Valanth Prime had been filled with screaming. The thunder of weapons, the clicking laughter of the Kethrak, the sound of a civilization dying. Now there was only silence. High Luminary Solveth emerged from the tunnels slowly, blinking in the light of the twin suns. He expected to find his world in ruins. He expected to find bodies in the streets and fires burning in the distance. He found humans. They were everywhere. Small figures in strange uniforms, moving through the wreckage with purpose and care. Some were treating wounded Valanchi with medical equipment that hummed with unfamiliar energy. Others were clearing debris and searching for survivors. A few were standing guard, watching the sky with weapons ready, though there was nothing left to guard against. The Kethrak were gone. Solveth walked through what remained of the Grand Plaza, trying to process what he was seeing. A human medic looked up from treating an injured Valanchi child and nodded at him. The child's glow, which had been the pale white of terror, was slowly returning to normal. How? Solveth whispered to himself. How is this possible? He found Captain Vasquez standing near the ruins of the council chamber, speaking quietly with her officers. She looked different than she had on the screen. Smaller, more tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and a cut across her forehead that had been hastily bandaged. She looked like someone who had been through a war. Because she had. When she noticed Solveth approaching, she dismissed her officers and turned to face him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You came, Solveth finally said. His voice was barely a whisper. One ship against an empire, and you came. Vasquez shrugged slightly. That is the job. The job? Solveth shook his head in disbelief. You could have died. Your people could have died. You almost did die. I saw your ship burning. I saw the damage. You kept fighting when any reasonable species would have retreated. Why? Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Then she turned and looked out at the recovering city. Her expression was unreadable, but something in her eyes seemed very old. Do you know what Earth was like before we reached the stars? She asked. Solveth shook his head. It was dangerous. We evolved on a world that was constantly trying to kill us. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, other humans. She smiled faintly. We spent most of our history afraid of the dark, afraid of what might be hiding in the next valley or across the ocean, afraid of each other. But you survived. We did. And do you know how? Vasquez turned back to face him. We survived because we learned to answer when someone called for help. When someone screamed in the night, we did not run away. We ran toward the sound, even when we were afraid, especially when we were afraid. Her voice grew soft, because we remembered what it was like to be the one screaming. We remembered how it felt to be alone in the dark, calling out, hoping that someone, anyone would come. Solveth felt tears forming in his eyes. Among the Valanchi, tears were rare. They came only in moments of overwhelming emotion. We called out, he said. We pressed that beacon expecting nothing, hoping for nothing, and you came. Yes. Why us? We are strangers to you. We had forgotten your name. We forgot we had even signed that treaty. Vasquez reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm. Because you called. That is enough. That will always be enough. Solveth looked around at the humans working in the ruins. A large man with burn marks on his hands was helping to rebuild a communication tower, laughing at something one of the Valanchi engineers had said. A woman with a bandaged arm was teaching a group of Valanchi children a human game that involved kicking a round ball. A man in a white apron was attempting to cook food over a makeshift fire, cheerfully mangling Valanchi words as he offered samples to anyone who passed by. These were the monsters that the galaxy feared. These were the beings that the Kethrock had called prey. I do not understand you, Solveth admitted. Your capacity for violence is terrifying. What I saw in orbit, what your soldiers did on those ships, it was beyond anything I could imagine. And yet here you are, treating our wounded, feeding our children, rebuilding our homes. How can you be both things at once? Vasquez smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes. Because we choose what kind of monsters we are. Every day, every moment, we make that choice. We can be the thing that hunts in the darkness. Her smile faded slightly. Or we can be the thing that fights the darkness. The Kethrak chose to be predators. We chose to be something else. Guardians? Something like that. We are the ones who answer distress calls. We are the ones who run toward the screaming. It does not matter who is calling or where they are or what the odds are. If someone needs help, we come. Solveth wiped his eyes. The galaxy whispers about you. They call you monsters. They tell stories of your violence and your spite. They are not wrong, but they do not tell the whole story. Vasquez shook her head. No, they never do. In the days that followed, the Valanchi began to rebuild. The humans stayed longer than they needed to, helping where they could, teaching skills that the peaceful species had never learned. How to treat wounds, how to build shelters, how to survive when the universe turned hostile. Before she left, Captain Vasquez stood with Solveth one last time at the site where the council chamber would be rebuilt. Will you be all right? She asked. I do not know, Solveth admitted. We have lost so many. Our innocence, our belief that the universe was kind. Those things will not return. No, they will not. The universe is not kind. It never was. Vasquez paused. But it does not have to be cruel either. There are still good people out there. Species who choose to help rather than hurt. You are not alone. I know that now. Solveth looked at the human captain with new eyes. Thank you, Elena Vasquez, for everything. Thank me by surviving, by rebuilding, by remembering. She smiled. And next time someone calls for help, answer. That is how we make the darkness smaller, one answered call at a time. The Perseverance left Valanth Prime the next morning. The Valanchi watched it climb into the sky, this battered, broken, beautiful ship that had saved them all. It passed through the debris field of the battle, through the wreckage of the Kethrak fleet that had seemed so invincible. Then it was gone. Across the galaxy, the story spread. The Kethrak Dominion withdrew from all territories bordering Concord-protected space. They did not speak of what had happened at Valanth Prime. They did not need to. Everyone already knew. Other species began to whisper different stories about humans. Not just tales of violence and spite, but stories of rescue, of protection, of small soft beings who looked at overwhelming odds and said, "That is the job," before charging forward anyway. In the dark corners of the galaxy, where the weak and the forgotten lived in fear, a new saying began to spread. It was spoken in 100 different languages, but the meaning was always the same. Pray you never need to call the humans, but if you do, they will answer. Always. On a distant world, a young creature from a species that had never known hope listened to the story for the first time. She looked up at the stars with new eyes. "The humans," she whispered, "they really come when you call?" Her elder nodded slowly. "They do. They always do." "Then we are not alone." "No, little one, we never were." The stars burned bright overhead, ancient and cold and uncaring. But somewhere among them, humans were watching, waiting, ready to answer the next call. The true monsters of the galaxy, the ones who chose to protect, the ones who always came.